At my graduation dinner, my parents told me, "You were our biggest mistake because I chose nursing instead of medicine like my golden child sister." And my dad actually put down his fork to say, "We wasted 22 years on you." My name is Elena Hartley, 22 years old, and 3 hours ago, I walked across that stage with a BSN degree I earned through 4 years of night shifts, clinical rotations that left me bleeding through my scrubs, and student loans I took out myself because my parents couldn't justify investing in a career that pays half what real doctors make. The restaurant they chose, Marcello's, the same upscale Italian place where they'd celebrated my sister Victoria's medical school acceptance, suddenly felt like a courtroom where I was the only defendant. Victoria sat across from me, her diamond engagement ring from her surgeon fiancé catching the candlelight as she reached for her wine glass. She didn't even flinch when Dad said it, just gave me this small, satisfied smile, the same one she'd worn when she accidentally spilled coffee on my college application essays, the same one when she told my high school boyfriend I was cheating on him with his best friend, the same one when she convinced our parents to pull funding for my pre-med prerequisite classes sophomore year because Elena clearly doesn't have the discipline for real medicine. 22 years, Mom repeated, dabbing her mouth with her napkin like we were discussing the weather instead of my complete worthlessness. All those piano lessons, the private tutoring, the summer programs at Johns Hopkins, and you chose to empty bedpans. Around us, other diners tried not to stare. The couple at the next table had gone quiet, forks suspended midair. The waiter approaching our table actually backed away slowly, like he could sense the toxicity radiating from our corner booth. But my parents' voices never wavered from that cocktail party volume, loud enough to humiliate, polite enough to maintain deniability. At least Victoria understood the value of the opportunities we gave her, Dad continued, gesturing to my sister with his steak knife. Chief resident track at Mass General by age 30. That's the return on investment we expected from both our daughters. Victoria leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. It's not too late, you know. You could do a post-bac program, apply to med school for next year. I could even write you a recommendation letter. Her eyes glittered with malice. Though I suppose 4 years of wiping asses might look a bit odd on an application. The thing is, I'd expected some version of this. My parents had been openly disappointed since freshman year when I switched from pre-med to nursing, but I hadn't expected the public execution, the calculated cruelty, the way they were savoring every moment of my humiliation, like it was the tiramisu they'd already ordered for dessert. We're not paying for any more education, Mom added, her tone final. Consider your undergraduate degree our parting gift. You're on your own now. I looked down at my untouched chicken marsala, at the graduation card they'd placed beside my plate earlier, before the massacre began. Inside, I already knew, would be a check for exactly $50, not even enough to cover my cap and gown rental. Victoria's medical school graduation gift had been a BMW. But as I sat there, listening to them catalog my failures and inadequacies with the enthusiasm of art critics at a gallery opening, something shifted inside me. Not sadness, not even anger, really. Just a cold, crystalline clarity. Because here's what my parents didn't know. I hadn't just spent 4 years learning to empty bedpans. I'd spent 4 years learning every intimate detail of how the human body works and fails. I'd spent 4 years in the ER watching exactly what happens when someone's medications get accidentally mixed wrong. I'd spent 4 years learning which symptoms get taken seriously and which get dismissed. I'd spent 4 years becoming intimately familiar with how easy it is for a healthy person to suddenly become very, very sick when the right person has access to the right knowledge. And I'd spent the last 6 months working as a floor nurse at the exact hospital where Victoria was doing her residency, watching her cut corners, falsify patient charts, and steal prescription medication from the pharmacy to fuel what she thought was a well-hidden Adderall addiction. Watching her charm attending physicians while making catastrophic mistakes that I'd quietly corrected before anyone noticed. Documenting everything with the methodical precision that 4 years of nursing school had taught me. I'd also spent considerable time recently becoming very close friends with James Fletcher, the hospital's new compliance officer who'd just transferred from the state medical board. The same James Fletcher who'd confided over coffee last week that he was building a case against someone high profile in the residency program, but needed one more witness willing to come forward with evidence. The same James Fletcher whose business card was currently tucked in my purse, next to the USB drive containing 6 months of meticulously documented incidents with timestamps, patient ID numbers, and photographic evidence of Victoria's prescription theft that I'd captured using the security badge she'd lent me to grab her forgotten stethoscope from her locker. "You know what?" I said, setting down my fork and meeting each of their eyes in turn. My voice was steady, pleasant even. "You're absolutely right. I should have aimed higher." Victoria's smile widened. She thought she'd won. "I should have aimed for something really prestigious," I continued, pulling the graduation card toward me and opening it. $50, as predicted. I tucked it carefully into my purse. Something that requires real integrity, real ethics, the kind of standards that separate actual healers from people who just want the title and the paycheck. Dad's expression shifted slightly, the first hint of uncertainty crossing his face. "Thank you for dinner," I said, standing up smoothly. "And thank you for the very generous gift. I'm sure the licensing board will appreciate that I've managed to stay financially independent through all this." "The what?" Mom's voice had lost some of its smugness. "Nothing," I smiled, slinging my purse over my shoulder. "Just thinking out loud about my future career opportunities. You know how we nurses are, always documenting everything, part of our training." I looked at Victoria directly, watching her confidence waver as she tried to decipher my expression. "By the way, Vic, I ran into Dr. Morrison yesterday. He mentioned you've been looking a little tired lately. Having trouble sleeping?" Her face went white. Dr. Morrison was the program director, the one who'd been asking questions about medication inventory discrepancies. "Sweet dreams," I said cheerfully, turning to leave. "I have an early shift tomorrow at Mass General, but I'm sure I'll see you around the hospital. We're practically colleagues now." As I walked out of Marcello's, I pulled out my phone and opened my text thread with James Fletcher. The message I'd drafted earlier, the one I'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to send, glowed on my screen. "Ready to talk about Victoria Hartley. I have everything you need. Can we meet tomorrow?" My finger hovered over the send button for just a second. Then I pressed it. Behind me, through the restaurant's windows, I could see my parents had stopped eating. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth. My father was leaning across the table, speaking urgently to Victoria, whose face had gone from white to green. They'd realize soon enough what I'd been doing for the past 6 months. They'd understand that their biggest mistake had just become their golden child's worst nightmare. But by then, it would be far too late. My phone buzzed with James's immediate reply. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Bring everything." I smiled, slipped my phone back in my purse, and walked toward my car. The 10-year-old Honda Civic I'd paid for myself, that had carried me through every shift, every clinical, every moment when my parents couldn't be bothered to show up. That Honda had never looked more beautiful than it did right now, gleaming under the parking lot lights like a chariot about to carry me into battle. And I was ready for war. The morning after graduation dinner, I woke up at 6 a.m. in my studio apartment, the cramped 400-square-foot space in a converted warehouse that my parents had never bothered to visit, not once in 4 years. They'd seen Victoria's luxury 2-bedroom in Back Bay dozens of times, helped her pick out furniture, paid her first and last month's rent. For me, they'd said an adult should figure out their own living situation. I made coffee in the French press I'd bought at Goodwill, dressed in my scrubs, and pulled out the USB drive I'd been compiling since January. 6 months of evidence. I'd started documenting the moment I realized Victoria was stealing medications, but the deeper I dug, the worse it got. Medication errors she'd blamed on other residents. Patient charts she'd falsified to cover her mistakes. A surgery she'd performed while visibly impaired that I'd witnessed through the OR observation window. A procedure that should have taken 40 minutes but stretched to 2 hours because her hands were shaking so badly. The patient had survived, barely, and Victoria had charmed the attending into believing the complications were unavoidable. But I had the timestamps. The pharmacy logs showing when she'd accessed controlled substances outside her assigned patient's treatment windows. Security footage I'd accidentally requested while helping with a different investigation that showed her entering the pharmacy at 2 a.m. on her nights off. My phone rang at 7:15. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad. Voicemail, Victoria. I answered that one. What the fuck did you say to them last night? Her voice was shrill, desperate. Nothing like the composed golden child who'd smiled while our parents eviscerated me. They've been calling me all morning asking about Dr. Morrison, about medication logs, about your performance at the hospital. I kept my voice neutral, clinical. I imagine they're concerned. Parents do worry about their children's careers. You bitch, you... She caught herself, and I could practically hear her recalculating. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to wheedling. Look, Elena, I know last night was harsh. Mom and Dad can be intense, but we're sisters. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you saw. I don't think anything, Victoria. I documented facts, dates, times, patient ID numbers, pharmacy access logs, the kind of thorough charting they teach us in nursing school. I paused. The kind of attention to detail that apparently doesn't get covered in medical school. Silence. Then, what do you want? Want? I laughed softly. I don't want anything from you, Vic. I just want to do my job. Speaking of which, I have a meeting in 30 minutes. You should probably get some sleep. You look tired lately. Everyone's noticed. I hung up before she could respond. The coffee shop where I'd agreed to meet James Fletcher was a deliberately public choice. A busy Starbucks 3 blocks from Mass General where residents and nurses grabbed their morning caffeine. I wanted Victoria to know this wasn't happening in shadows. I wanted her colleagues to see me sitting down with the compliance officer, wanted the whispers to start before the official investigation even began. James was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open. He was 42, methodical, and had built his reputation on taking down a fraudulent cardiac surgeon at his last hospital, a surgeon who'd been performing unnecessary procedures for profit. The case had made national news. Elena, he greeted me, gesturing to the chair across from him. I appreciate you reaching out. I slid into the seat and pulled out the USB drive. Before I give you this, I need you to understand something. Victoria Hartley is my sister. His eyebrows rose slightly. My parents worship her. She's brilliant, charming, connected. She's engaged to Dr. Nathan Pierce. You probably know him, thoracic surgery attending. Her program director thinks she walks on water. She's been groomed since birth to be exactly what she is. I placed the drive on the table between us. And she's dangerous. James picked up the drive, turning it over in his hands. Walk me through what's on here. For the next 45 minutes, I did. Every incident, every near miss, every falsified chart. I showed him the patterns. How Victoria always worked the same pharmacy night shift rotation when covering call. How her medication errors clustered around periods when she'd been seen at hospital social events looking progressively more wired and erratic. How 3 different nurses had filed informal complaints about her behavior that had mysteriously vanished from the resident evaluation system. This patient here, I pulled up a file on his laptop. Marcus Reynolds, 58, routine gallbladder surgery. Should have been discharged in 2 days. Ended up in ICU for a week with cardiac complications because Victoria prescribed a medication he was allergic to, an allergy that was flagged in red on his chart. She changed the documentation afterward to make it look like the allergy was added post-incident. James's expression had gone from interested to stone-cold professional. You witnessed this? I was his floor nurse during recovery. I caught the error before he took the medication and documented the original chart before she altered it. It's all in there. Screenshots with metadata showing the edit timestamps. Jesus, he muttered. There's more. I pulled out a folder I'd brought separately. Attendance logs showing she's missed 17 required training sessions this year. Peer evaluations from other residents, the anonymous ones, describing her as erratic, confrontational, and increasingly unreliable. And these. I laid out 3 incident reports I'd filed myself through the hospital's anonymous safety system. All 3 were dismissed without investigation. By whom? Dr. Richard Hartley. I met his eyes. My father. He's on the hospital board of directors, has been for 12 years. The silence that followed was profound. Your father dismissed complaints about your sister while serving on the board? James said slowly. That's not just medical negligence. That's institutional corruption. I know. My hands were steady as I closed the folder. That's why I waited until I graduated, until I couldn't be accused of vindictiveness or jealousy or trying to eliminate competition, until I had unassailable documentation, and until I was no longer dependent on them for anything. James's respect was visible. How long have you been planning this? Since sophomore year, I admitted. Since the day Victoria told my parents I'd been skipping classes, a lie that got my pre-med funding pulled. Since the day I realized she'd do anything to remain the golden child, including destroying me. I just needed time to become someone who'd be believed. My phone buzzed. Victoria again. I declined the call. She's scared, I said. She called this morning, asked what I wanted. What did you tell her? That I wanted to do my job. I smiled grimly. She didn't understand that my job now includes protecting patients from doctors who view them as props in their personal success stories. James closed his laptop with careful precision. I need to bring this to the chief medical officer and the board. That means your father will be in the room when preliminary findings are presented. I know. Your family will hate you for this. They already do. I stood up, slinging my purse over my shoulder. The difference is now they'll have a reason. As I walked out of the Starbucks, I saw 2 residents from Victoria's program at a nearby table. They'd been close enough to see me meeting with James, close enough to wonder why. By afternoon, the whispers would start. By evening, Victoria would know that whatever I'd handed over was serious enough for a formal meeting with compliance. My phone rang again. Mom this time, I answered. Elena Grace Hartley. Her voice was acid. Your father just received a call requesting his presence at an emergency board meeting this afternoon regarding personnel concerns. Would you know anything about that? I might, I said pleasantly. Why? Because Victoria is terrified, and you apparently had coffee this morning with James Fletcher, who is now requesting her complete resident file and pharmacy access records. Sounds like he's doing his job. What have you done? Mom's voice cracked slightly. Whatever Victoria did, whatever you think happened, I don't think, Mom. I know. I documented. I verified. I followed every protocol I was taught. I paused at the crosswalk, watching the morning traffic. You remember protocols, right? Those annoying rules meant to protect patients? The same rules Victoria thinks don't apply to her? She made mistakes. Every resident makes mistakes. Every resident doesn't steal controlled substances. Every resident doesn't falsify patient records. Every resident doesn't have a board member father who covers up complaints. My voice hardened. And every resident doesn't spend years destroying their sister because they can't stand the idea of sharing attention. You're doing this for revenge. Mom's voice was shaking now. Because of what we said last night, because you're jealous. I'm doing this because 3 months ago, Victoria nearly killed a patient through negligence, and when I reported it through proper channels, Dad made sure the complaint disappeared. I let that sink in. A 72-year-old grandmother named Patricia Chen would have died if I hadn't caught the medication error in time. But I'm sure you've convinced yourself that doesn't matter because Victoria's career is more important than some random patient's life. Silence. The meeting is at 2 p.m., I continued. I'll be there. I'm required to be since I filed the formal complaints. I suggest you prepare Victoria for the fact that her residency is over. Mass General doesn't tolerate drug theft, even from golden children with connected families. I hung up. By noon, my phone had 17 missed calls. Victoria, Mom, Dad, Victoria's fiancé Nathan, even 2 family friends who'd clearly been drafted into the intervention campaign. I ignored all of them and went to work my shift, caring for post-surgical patients with the same meticulous attention I'd applied to documenting my sister's destruction. At 1:45 p.m., I changed out of my scrubs and into the professional dress I'd brought. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into the administrative wing of Mass General and took a seat outside the boardroom where my father had spent 12 years protecting the hospital's reputation. Through the door's window, I could see him already inside, sitting rigidly in his chair. Dr. Morrison was there, the chief medical officer, 2 other board members, and James Fletcher with his laptop open. At exactly 2 p.m., I was called in. Victoria wasn't there yet, likely being intercepted by her program director to inform her that her presence was requested. But I'd planned for that. I wanted to lay out the evidence first, wanted the board to see the documentation before Victoria could deploy her charm. Miss Hartley, the CMO began, you've filed serious allegations. I've filed documented evidence, I corrected politely. With respect, sir, these aren't allegations. These are facts verified through hospital records, pharmacy logs, and security footage. My father's face was purple. This is a vendetta. Dr. Hartley, James cut in smoothly. Perhaps you should recuse yourself from this discussion given your familial relationship to both the complainant and the subject of the investigation. I've been on this board for 12 years, which is precisely why your involvement in dismissing 3 separate complaints about your daughter represents a conflict of interest that this board cannot ignore. James's tone was professional, but unyielding. I have documentation showing you personally intervened to prevent investigation of incidents reported by Miss Elena Hartley, including the Patricia Chen case involving a near-fatal medication error. The room went very quiet. I'd like to present the evidence chronologically, I said, connecting my laptop to the room's display. Starting with January 15th, when Dr. Victoria Hartley first accessed controlled substances outside her assigned patient care protocols. For the next 90 minutes, I walked them through everything. Every theft, every falsification, every moment when Victoria's ambition and addiction had placed patients at risk. I showed them the patterns, the escalation, the near misses that had been covered up. I showed them my father's electronic signatures on dismissal forms for complaints that should have triggered immediate investigation. By the time Victoria finally arrived, escorted by her program director, the board had already seen enough. Her face was carefully composed, but I could see the panic underneath. The same panic I'd seen the night before when she realized I wasn't the family doormat anymore. Dr. Hartley, the CMO said, please sit down, we have some questions. As she took her seat, her eyes found mine. The hatred there was pure and undiluted, but underneath it was something else. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Good. Because I was just getting started. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of Victoria's composure slowly disintegrating as I methodically dismantled every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to characterize her drug theft and patient endangerment as miscommunication or administrative errors. When she claimed the pharmacy logs must be mistaken, I pulled up security footage showing her badge accessing the medication room at 2:47 a.m. on a night she wasn't on call. When she suggested the medication errors were due to unclear handwriting in patient charts, I displayed the digital records showing her electronic signature on orders that directly contradicted flagged allergies. When she tried to explain away her missed training sessions, I presented emails from the program coordinator showing 17 unanswered requests for rescheduling. By hour 3, her fiancé Nathan had been called in. He'd stormed into the boardroom with the confidence of a senior attending who'd been trained to believe his authority was unquestionable. That confidence evaporated when James showed him the text messages Victoria had sent requesting he write her prescriptions for Adderall for a friend who needed help studying. You involved me in prescription fraud? Nathan's voice was deadly quiet. Victoria reached for his hand. He pulled away. My father tried intervening 6 different times. Each time, James smoothly redirected the conversation back to evidence, back to protocols, back to the undeniable fact that a resident physician had been systematically stealing medications while her board member father ran interference. By hour 4, when the CMO formally suspended Victoria from all clinical duties pending a full investigation and mandatory drug testing, she finally cracked. This is all her fault. She pointed at me, her voice shrill. She's been watching me, documenting everything, waiting for me to fail, because she's jealous that I'm actually successful while she's just a nurse. The word just hung in the air like a slap. Just a nurse, I repeated softly. The same nurse who caught your mistakes before they killed people. The same nurse who documented evidence that will now prevent you from endangering more patients. Yes, Victoria, I'm just a nurse. And apparently, that's enough to end your career. The CMO stood. Dr. Hartley, you're suspended effective immediately. Your badge will be deactivated. You're to have no contact with patients, no access to hospital facilities, and no involvement in any ongoing cases. We'll be conducting a comprehensive review of every patient interaction you've had over the past 18 months. Victoria turned to our father, desperate. Dad, do something. Call someone. You know people. Richard, I think it's time for you to leave as well, the CMO said, his tone making clear it wasn't a suggestion. We'll be reviewing your role in dismissing previous complaints. I'm sure you understand the gravity of the situation. My father's face had gone from purple to gray. As he stood to leave, he looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Not disappointment or contempt, but actual hatred. I hope you're satisfied, he said quietly. You've destroyed your sister's life over petty jealousy. No, Dad. I protected patients from a dangerous physician. That Victoria happens to be my sister is unfortunate, but it doesn't change the facts. I met his eyes steadily. And I hope you're prepared for the fact that your role in covering up her negligence makes you complicit. The board isn't just investigating Victoria now. They're investigating you. His hand clenched on the back of his chair. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Then he turned and walked out, Victoria stumbling after him in tears. Nathan stayed behind, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. How long? He asked. How long what? How long were you planning this? Since she nearly killed Patricia Chen, I said honestly. Since I realized that reporting through proper channels wouldn't work because Dad would make it disappear. Since I understood that the only way to stop her was to build a case so airtight that no amount of family influence could dismiss it. He shook his head slowly. I'm calling off the engagement. I figured. She's sick. She needs help, not. He gestured vaguely at the evidence still displayed on the screen. She needed help 6 months ago. She needed intervention when the first complaints were filed. Instead, she got protection and enablement. I started packing up my laptop. You want to help her now? Encourage her to check into rehab before the medical board files criminal charges, because that's coming next. Nathan left without another word. James Fletcher stayed as I gathered my things. That took courage, he said. No, I corrected. Courage would have been reporting her the first time I saw something wrong. This was calculated vengeance dressed up as professional responsibility. He smiled slightly. Can it be both? Maybe. I closed my laptop bag. What happens now? Now we interview every nurse, resident, and attending who worked with her. We review every patient case from her entire residency. We build the complete picture. He paused. And we work with the state medical board to determine if criminal charges are appropriate for the prescription theft. How long before that determination? 2 weeks, maybe 3. He studied me carefully. Your testimony will be crucial. The defense will try to paint you as vindictive, motivated by family rivalry rather than patient safety. Let them try. I slung my bag over my shoulder. I have 18 months of impeccable nursing records, perfect performance reviews, and documentation that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. They can question my motives all they want. They can't question my evidence. I walked out of Mass General at 6:15 p.m. The evening shift was starting, nurses and residents streaming through the entrance I was exiting. A few recognized me, their eyes curious. By tomorrow, everyone would know. The nurse who destroyed her doctor sister, the whistleblower who took down a board member's daughter. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You fucking bitch, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything. Victoria. Using someone else's phone since her hospital line had been deactivated. I typed back. I protected patients. That you were the threat I protected them from isn't my fault. Another text. Mom and Dad never want to see you again. That's fine. I never needed them anyway. You'll regret this. Unlikely. I paused, then added, Tell Dad he should hire a lawyer. The board's investigation into his conduct starts Monday. I have emails showing he knew about your drug theft for at least 3 months. I blocked the number and kept walking. My apartment had never felt more like a sanctuary. Small, cramped, filled with secondhand furniture, but mine. Earned through my work, protected by my boundaries, untainted by my family's toxic expectations. I made dinner, changed into comfortable clothes, and opened my laptop to the folder I'd titled Contingency Plans. Because I'd known this wouldn't end with Victoria's suspension, I'd known my parents would come for me, that they'd use every resource available to punish me for exposing their golden child. So I'd prepared. Inside the folder were copies of everything I'd given James Fletcher, but also additional documentation I hadn't shared yet. Records of my father's pattern of dismissing complaints at the hospital over his 12-year tenure. Evidence that Victoria wasn't the first case he'd buried, just the most blatant. Names of 3 other physicians whose misconduct he'd swept under the rug, all of whom happened to have families who donated significantly to hospital fundraising campaigns. I'd spent 6 months not just building a case against Victoria, but against the entire system that had protected her, and I'd done it alone, trusting no one, because I'd learned from watching Victoria that the only person you could rely on was yourself. My phone rang. A local number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Elena, this is Dr. Patricia Chen." I sat up straighter. "Dr. Chen, how did you get this number?" "Hospital directory. I hope you don't mind." Her voice was warm, gentle. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "I heard what happened at today's board meeting. What you did. What you've been doing." She paused. "I'm the Patricia Chen whose life you saved, the one your sister nearly killed with the medication error." My throat tightened. "You know about that?" "James Fletcher called me this afternoon. Asked if I'd be willing to testify about what happened, about how a nurse caught an error that my physician missed." Another pause. "He told me that nurse was you and that you've been fighting for months to make sure the same thing doesn't happen to someone else." "I was just doing my job." "No, honey. You were doing what most people don't have the courage to do, standing up to power, even when that power is your own family." Her voice wavered slightly. "I have 3 grandchildren. They still have their grandmother because of you. Because you were paying attention when someone with more credentials and more authority wasn't." I wiped at my eyes, frustrated by the sudden tears. "I'm sorry it happened at all." "I know. But I'm calling to tell you that when they try to tear you down, and they will try, you remember that you saved lives. Plural. Not just mine, but every patient Victoria would have endangered if you hadn't stopped her." She cleared her throat. "I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell them exactly what happened and exactly who caught the mistake. And I'm going to make sure they understand that the hierarchy they worship nearly killed me." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my apartment for a long time, processing. I'd prepared for my family's hatred, for their attempts to discredit me, for the professional fallout. I hadn't prepared for gratitude from someone whose life I'd saved without them knowing. At 9 p.m., my mother called from a number I didn't have blocked yet. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "What do you want, Mom?" "Your father has been placed on administrative leave." Her voice was icy. "The board is investigating his entire tenure. They're talking about stripping his emeritus status, removing his name from the research wing he funded." "Good." "Good?" Her voice rose. "Elena, he's 64 years old. This is his legacy, his reputation, everything he's built. Everything he built on a foundation of covering up medical negligence and enabling his daughter's addiction." I kept my voice flat, clinical. "He chose to protect Victoria instead of patients. Now he faces consequences. That's how accountability works." "She's your sister." "She's a doctor who stole drugs and falsified records. The fact that we share DNA doesn't change that." I stood up, pacing. "And you want to know what's really twisted? You're calling to yell at me about Dad's reputation. Not one word about how Victoria is doing, whether she's getting help, whether she's facing her addiction, just anger that the family name is being damaged. We're not paying for your student loans anymore." I laughed. "You never were. I took out every penny myself because you refused to help with nursing school, remember? You said it wasn't worth investing in." "We'll contest any claims you make about Victoria. We'll make sure everyone knows you did this out of spite." "Go ahead. James Fletcher has 18 months of documentation. Patricia Chen is willing to testify. 3 other nurses have come forward since this afternoon with their own stories about Victoria's behavior." I paused. "You can control the narrative in your country club. You can't control it in court." She hung up without another word. At 10 p.m., I received an email from James. "Medical board meeting scheduled for next Friday. They're fast-tracking the investigation given the severity. Expect subpoenas for testimony. Also, 3 more residents have contacted me with concerns about prescribing patterns. This is bigger than we thought. I replied, I'm ready. Send whatever you need. Then I opened a different file on my laptop, one I'd been compiling since sophomore year, when Victoria convinced my parents to pull my funding. A detailed record of every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd executed, every time she'd sabotaged my life to maintain her position as the golden child. The coffee on my college applications, the lies about my supposed boyfriend drama, the forged email she'd sent to my chemistry professor claiming I'd cheated on an exam, the false accusation of stealing jewelry that had gotten me temporarily banned from family gatherings. All documented, all verified, all saved. Because I'd learned something in 4 years of nursing school that Victoria had never grasped in her medical training. The best defense is preparation, and the best offense is truth. And I had prepared for years. The subpoena arrived on Monday. Official, legal, irrevocable. My testimony was required before the state medical board on Friday at 9 a.m. Victoria's testimony was scheduled for 2 p.m. the same day, a deliberate choice that meant she'd spend the morning knowing I was in that room, systematically dismantling the brilliant career she'd built on manipulation and entitlement. Tuesday brought a surprise visitor to my apartment. I opened the door to find Nathan Pierce standing in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. 5 minutes, he said. That's all I'm asking. I should have closed the door. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. He paced my small living room, seeming uncomfortable in the space that was so clearly different from Victoria's luxury apartment. I've been going through her things, he said finally. The apartment we shared. Found a drawer full of pill bottles. Adderall, Xanax, Ambien. Some prescribed, most not. Labels with other people's names scraped off. I know. How long did you know? Since January. Maybe longer if I'm honest with myself. I just didn't have proof until I started working at Mass General and saw the pharmacy logs. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Did you really not notice? I noticed she was driven, focused, intense. He ran his hand through his hair. I thought she was just competitive. Brilliant residents are often obsessive. There's a difference between obsessive and addicted. I should have seen it. His voice cracked slightly. I'm a fucking surgeon. I've seen addiction. I've treated patients in the OR who were there because of addiction complications, and I didn't see it in my own fiancé. She's very good at hiding things she doesn't want seen, I said quietly. Trust me, I've been watching her do it our entire lives. He looked at me then, really looked. Did you always hate her? No. The answer surprised me with its honesty. I loved her. She was my big sister. She taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, braided my hair before school. I felt the old grief surface, unexpected and unwelcome. But somewhere around middle school, she figured out that our parents' love was transactional, conditional on achievement, and she decided that meant she had to eliminate any competition, including me. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, I agreed, but it explains why I was willing to do it. You want to know what the real tragedy is? If she'd just let me be a nurse, if she'd accepted that I didn't want to compete with her for our parents' approval, none of this would have happened. She could have kept stealing drugs, kept endangering patients, kept building her brilliant career. I met his eyes, but she couldn't let it go. She had to humiliate me one more time at that graduation dinner, had to make sure I knew exactly how worthless she thought I was. And that's when I decided she didn't get to hurt anyone else. The medical board is going to revoke her license. Probably. She'll never practice medicine again. That's the consequence of stealing controlled substances and falsifying patient records. My voice stayed steady. I didn't create those consequences. I just made sure they happened instead of being covered up. Nathan stood to leave, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, I read the Patricia Chen file, the one where Victoria nearly killed her. He looked back at me. You were right to report it. I just wish you'd found a way that didn't destroy everything. There wasn't one, I said simply. I tried official channels. My father buried them. This was the only way to make sure the truth came out. After he left, I sat down and wrote out my testimony for Friday. Every detail, every date, every moment that had led me from that graduation dinner to this point. James had told me to be factual, clinical, unemotional, to present evidence rather than accusations. But I planned to do more than that. Wednesday evening, my doorbell rang again. This time it was my mother, holding herself with the same rigid dignity she'd maintained my entire life. "You have no idea what you've done," she said without preamble. "The board has opened investigations into 15 cases your father reviewed over the past decade. His professional reputation is being demolished in medical journals. Victoria checked into a psychiatric facility this morning because she's having panic attacks so severe she can't breathe. Then she's finally getting the help she needed 6 months ago." "You did this!" My mother's composure cracked. "You planned this, you executed it, you destroyed your own family." Victoria destroyed herself. I stayed in the doorway, not inviting her in. I just documented it. And Dad destroyed his own reputation by prioritizing family loyalty over patient safety. I didn't force him to dismiss those complaints. He made that choice. She's your sister. She's also a doctor who took an oath to do no harm, then stole drugs and endangered patients. I felt my own control slipping. You want to stand there and talk about family loyalty? Where was your loyalty when Dad cut off my college funding? Where was your loyalty when Victoria spread lies about me that destroyed my relationships? Where was your loyalty at that graduation dinner when you both sat there and told me I was your biggest mistake? We were disappointed. You were cruel. Deliberately, publicly cruel. The anger I'd been suppressing for months finally broke through. You want to know why I was willing to do this? Why I spent 6 months building an airtight case against my own sister? Because at that dinner, I realized you never loved me. Not really. You loved the idea of having 2 successful daughters. But when I chose nursing instead of medicine, I became nothing to you. An embarrassment, a waste of 22 years. That's not... Don't lie to me now, Mom. You're only here because Victoria's life is falling apart and you need someone to blame. Well, here's the truth. Victoria made her choices. Dad made his. And I made mine. The difference is I can sleep at night knowing I protected patients. Can you say the same? She slapped me. Hard enough that my head snapped to the side. Hard enough that I tasted blood where my teeth cut the inside of my cheek. "Get out," I said quietly. "And don't come back. You're dead to this family." Good. That family was killing me anyway. She left, and I closed the door, locked it, and finally let myself cry. Not for Victoria or my parents or the family I'd lost, but for the little girl I'd been, who'd loved her big sister and believed her parents when they said they were proud of her. That little girl deserved better than what she'd gotten. Friday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. I dressed in my most professional outfit. Navy suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back. I looked like exactly what I was, a competent, credible healthcare professional who'd followed her training and protected patients. The medical board hearing room was smaller than I'd expected. 9 board members sat at a curved table facing a single chair where witnesses testified. James Fletcher sat to one side with his laptop. A court reporter positioned herself near the front. And in the back row, I spotted Patricia Chen, who'd come to watch despite not being called to testify today. "Miss Elena Hartley," the board chair began, "you've submitted extensive documentation regarding Dr. Victoria Hartley's conduct during her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. Before we examine that evidence, we'd like to understand your relationship with Dr. Hartley and the circumstances that led to your involvement in this investigation." "Victoria is my older sister," I said clearly. "We grew up in the same household. Our father, Dr. Richard Hartley, has served on the Mass General Board of Directors for 12 years. Our mother, Eleanor Hartley, is a retired pharmaceutical sales executive. Victoria attended Harvard Medical School and began her residency in internal medicine 2 years ago. And your relationship with her?" "Complicated." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Victoria has always been extremely competitive, particularly with regard to academic and professional achievement. When I chose nursing instead of medicine, My parents viewed it as a failure. At my graduation dinner 3 weeks ago, they told me I was their biggest mistake and that they'd wasted 22 years on me. One of the board members winced visibly. That same night, I made the decision to come forward with information I'd been gathering about Victoria's conduct at the hospital where we both work. I'd initially hoped to address her behavior through internal hospital channels, but those attempts were dismissed, specifically by my father, who has the authority to close complaint investigations. So you're testifying that this is motivated by family conflict? The question came from a board member on the far right, his tone skeptical. No, sir. I'm testifying that family conflict made me willing to endure the personal consequences of reporting a physician who was endangering patients. I pulled out my first piece of documentation. But the evidence stands regardless of my motivation. Dr. Victoria Hartley accessed controlled substances 53 times outside her assigned patient care protocols over 18 months. She falsified 6 patient charts to cover medication errors. She performed surgical procedures while impaired. And she stole prescription medications from the hospital pharmacy to support an Adderall addiction that she maintained throughout her residency. I spent the next 3 hours walking them through everything. Every pharmacy log, every security footage timestamp, every patient case where Victoria's negligence had nearly caused catastrophic harm. The board members' expression shifted from skeptical to concerned to horrified as the full scope became clear. When I showed them Patricia Chen's case, the near-fatal medication error that my father had dismissed, 2 board members asked for a break. One looked genuinely ill. Miss Hartley, the board chair said after we reconvened, you understand that your testimony will likely result in the permanent revocation of your sister's medical license? Yes, ma'am. And that your father will likely face professional consequences for his role in suppressing these complaints? Yes, ma'am. And you're prepared to proceed despite the personal cost to your family relationships? Ma'am, with respect, my family relationships were destroyed the moment my parents decided I was worthless for choosing nursing. The moment Victoria decided patients were less important than her career ambitions. The moment my father decided protecting his daughter's reputation mattered more than protecting the people in his hospital's care. I looked directly at each board member in turn. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people. That's still what I'm doing. The fact that the threat I'm reporting happens to be my sister doesn't change my obligation. The board chair nodded slowly. We appreciate your testimony. You'll be excused, but remain available for follow-up questions. Dr. Hartley will be called this afternoon. As I left the hearing room, Patricia Chen was waiting in the hallway. She hugged me wordlessly, and I felt something crack inside me. The armor I'd been wearing for months, the clinical detachment that had gotten me through. You did the right thing, she whispered. Don't let anyone tell you different. I made it to my car before I started shaking. Sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes until I could steady my hands enough to drive. By the time I got home, the hearing was reconvening for Victoria's testimony. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat in my apartment and waited for the news that would either validate everything I'd done or condemn me as the vindictive sister who'd destroyed a brilliant career out of jealousy. The call came at 4:47 p.m. James Fletcher. It's over, he said simply. The board voted unanimously to revoke her license. They're also referring her case to law enforcement for criminal prosecution of the prescription theft, and they've recommended your father be removed from the hospital board pending ethics investigation. How did she take it? She collapsed, had to be taken out by ambulance. He paused. Your mother was there. She tried to blame you in the hallway afterward. Called you a destroyer, said you'd ruined a brilliant doctor out of spite. Patricia Chen shut her down. Patricia was there? She testified voluntarily this afternoon. Told the board exactly what happened, exactly who caught the error, exactly how close she came to dying because your sister was more worried about her residency than patient care. His voice carried a note of satisfaction. Your mother didn't have much to say after that. After we hung up, I sat very still, processing the enormity of what had just happened. Victoria's career was over. My father's reputation was destroyed. My family was shattered beyond any possibility of repair. And I felt no guilt, only relief. Because somewhere in Massachusetts, Patricia Chen's grandchildren still had their grandmother. Somewhere, a patient Victoria would have treated next month was safe. Somewhere, a resident who might have followed Victoria's example learned that consequences were real. I had destroyed my sister. I had demolished my family. I had violated every expectation of loyalty and forgiveness that society demanded, and I would do it again. The criminal charges came 3 days later. Massachusetts State Police arrested Victoria at the psychiatric facility where she'd been admitted after the board hearing. The news made local headlines. Prominent doctor arrested for prescription fraud, faces multiple felony counts. My phone exploded with texts and calls. Former nursing school classmates, colleagues from the hospital, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all wanting to know the details, all either condemning me or praising me depending on their perspective. I ignored most of them, but one call I answered. Dr. Morrison, Victoria's former program director. "Miss Hartley," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I dismissed you when you first tried to report concerns about your sister. I told you that residents made mistakes, that you needed to understand the pressure they were under." His voice was heavy with regret. I prioritized protecting a resident I thought showed promise over listening to a nurse who was trying to protect patients. That was wrong. Yes, it was. The hospital is implementing new protocols. Any complaint from nursing staff triggers automatic investigation, regardless of the physician's standing. Your father's dismissal authority has been revoked. We're also creating an anonymous reporting system that bypasses departmental review. He paused. We're calling it the Hartley Protocol. My throat tightened. Don't name it after me. Why not? You did what our system should have done from the beginning. You protected patients when the people in power wouldn't. After we hung up, I found myself staring at the pile of mail that had accumulated over the past week. Most of it was junk, but one envelope stood out. Heavy cardstock, no return address, my name in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single page, typewritten, "You have destroyed this family. Your father has resigned from the hospital board in disgrace. His name has been removed from the research wing. Victoria faces up to 10 years in prison. Our friends won't speak to us. The country club revoked our membership. All of this because you couldn't accept that your sister was more successful than you. I hope you're satisfied with the pain you've caused. You are no daughter of mine." No signature. Just accusation and rage. I read it once, then put it through my paper shredder. The trial date was set for 6 weeks later. Victoria's attorney tried negotiating a plea deal, 5 years in minimum security, immediate entry into rehabilitation, probation afterward. The prosecutor's office contacted me about whether I'd support the plea. No, I told them. She endangered patients for 18 months. She stole controlled substances. She falsified records. And when she was caught, her first instinct was to blame me rather than take responsibility. She needs to face full consequences. The defense will argue that you're vindictive, that you manufactured evidence to destroy your sister's career. Let them. I have pharmacy logs, security footage, patient charts, and testimony from 3 other nurses who witnessed her behavior. I have Patricia Chen alive to testify about the medication error that almost killed her. They can question my character all they want. They can't question my evidence. The prosecutor smiled grimly. Then we go to trial. 2 weeks before the trial, I received a visitor at work. My father appeared in the hospital lobby while I was clocking in for my shift. He looked 20 years older than the last time I'd seen him. Gray, hollow, diminished. 5 minutes, he said. The same words Nathan had used. We went to the hospital cafeteria. At 6 a.m., it was nearly empty, except for night shift workers finishing their meals before heading home. Your sister tried to kill herself last night, he said without preamble. They found her in her cell with a bedsheet. She's in the psych ward now. I felt my heart stop. Is she alive? Yes. They got to her in time. He stared at his untouched coffee. She left a note. Do you want to know what it said? I'm not sure. Tell Elena she won. He looked up at me then, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time in my life. That's all. 3 words. Dad? I came here to ask you to withdraw your testimony. Tell the prosecutor you were mistaken. that you exaggerated anything. Let Victoria take the plea deal and get help. She's sick, Elena. She needs treatment, not prison. She needed treatment 18 months ago. She needs accountability now. She's your sister. His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. How can you be so cold? How can you still not understand? I kept my voice low, controlled. Victoria didn't try to kill herself because of me. She tried to kill herself because she finally had to face what she did. The patients she endangered, the trust she violated, the oath she broke. That's not my fault. You could have reported her privately. You could have tried to help her get treatment without destroying her career, without... I tried that, Dad. I filed 3 separate complaints through proper hospital channels. You dismissed all of them. I leaned forward. You chose to protect her instead of the patients she was hurting. You chose family loyalty over professional ethics. And now you're sitting here asking me to do the same thing, to let her escape consequences because we share DNA. I thought I was protecting my daughter. You were enabling her addiction. There's a difference. I stood to leave. Victoria is alive. She has access to mental health treatment. She has the opportunity to get clean, to address her problems, to eventually rebuild some kind of life. Patricia Chen almost didn't get that chance because of Victoria's negligence. Neither did 6 other patients I documented. So no, I won't withdraw my testimony. And you need to stop asking. Then you've lost both your parents. I lost them years ago, Dad. I just didn't realize it until that graduation dinner. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, pharmacy logs showing systematic theft, security footage of Victoria accessing controlled substances outside her patient assignments, patient charts demonstrating falsification, and testimony from 4 nurses who'd witnessed her impairment while treating patients. The defense tried painting me as jealous, vindictive, someone who'd manufactured evidence to destroy a sister who'd outperformed her. They showed my parents in the gallery, gray and diminished, as evidence of the family I'd destroyed. They brought in character witnesses who testified about Victoria's academic brilliance, her dedication to medicine, her promising career. Patricia Chen demolished that narrative in 15 minutes. She took the stand on day 4, a 72-year-old grandmother with silver hair and steady hands, and described in clinical detail the medication error that almost killed her. How she'd mentioned her allergy multiple times to multiple staff members. How it was flagged in red on her chart. How Victoria had prescribed the contraindicated medication anyway, too impaired to notice the warnings. The only reason I'm alive, Patricia said clearly, is because a nurse named Elena Hartley caught the error before I took the medication. She noticed what a doctor missed. She did her job when someone with more credentials and more authority failed to do theirs. The defense attorney tried to suggest that mistakes happen, that even brilliant doctors make errors under pressure. Sir, Patricia said firmly, there's a difference between an error and negligence. An error is human. Negligence is choosing not to care enough to check. Dr. Hartley's pattern of mistakes, her drug theft, her falsification of records, that's not pressure. That's someone who valued her career more than the lives in her care. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They convicted Victoria on all counts: 8 counts of prescription fraud, 6 counts of falsifying medical records, 3 counts of practicing medicine while impaired. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I'd done what I needed to do. But James Fletcher called me afterward with the results. 7 years in state prison, 3 years probation, mandatory drug treatment, permanent revocation of medical license, and restitution to the hospital for stolen medications. He paused. The judge said in his ruling that physicians hold positions of profound trust, and that violations of that trust warrant severe consequences regardless of the personal circumstances that led to the behavior. And my father? The hospital board voted to strip his emeritus status and remove his name from all hospital buildings and programs. The state medical board is still investigating whether his conduct warrants additional sanctions, but at minimum, his reputation is permanently destroyed. After the sentencing, I received one final communication from my family, a legal document informing me that I'd been removed as beneficiary from all family trusts, wills, and financial accounts. My parents had effectively erased me from existence in every way the law allowed. I signed the acknowledgement form and sent it back without comment. 3 months after the sentencing, I was promoted to clinical coordinator for the medical surgical unit at Mass General. The promotion came with a significant raise, expanded responsibilities, and the respect of colleagues who'd watched me sacrifice everything to do what was right. On my first day in the new role, I found a card on my desk. Inside, in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for my life. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for proving that sometimes the right thing is worth any cost. Patricia Chen." I kept that card in my desk drawer. On difficult days, when I questioned the price I'd paid, I'd take it out and remember why I'd done it. 6 months after the trial, Nathan Pierce published an article in a major medical journal titled, "The Institutional Failures That Enable Physician Impairment." He detailed the systemic issues that allowed Victoria to operate unchecked for so long, the power dynamics that silenced concerns from nurses, the way institutional prestige protected dangerous physicians at the expense of patient safety. The article went viral in medical communities. Hospitals across the country implemented new protocols. Medical schools revised their curricula to address physician impairment and substance abuse more directly. And in the acknowledgments, Nathan wrote, "To the nurse who had the courage to speak when others wouldn't listen, you saved more lives than you'll ever know." I framed that page. 2 years after the trial, I stood in the administration wing of Massachusetts General Hospital, looking at the plaque they'd just unveiled on the wall outside the ethics office. The Hartley Patient Protection Protocol, established 2024, in recognition that patient safety requires courage from all healthcare professionals, regardless of rank or relation. The hospital CEO had asked me to attend the dedication ceremony. I'd initially refused, not wanting to make this about me, but Patricia Chen had called personally. "You need to be there," she'd said firmly. "Not for recognition, but so every nurse and medical student who walks past that plaque knows that speaking up matters. That one person can make a difference. That protecting patients is always the right choice." So I went. My parents weren't there. Victoria was 2 years into her 7-year sentence, reportedly doing well in the prison's drug treatment program. She'd written me one letter, 6 months after sentencing. I'd burned it without reading it. Nathan Pierce was there, now the hospital's director of surgical quality and safety. He nodded at me across the room, a gesture of respect between former enemies who'd found common ground. James Fletcher attended, retired now, but still sharp. He'd written a book about the case that had become required reading in medical ethics courses nationwide. And Patricia Chen stood beside me, her hand in mine, as the CEO spoke about institutional courage and the importance of protecting patient safety above all other considerations, including professional courtesy, institutional reputation, and family loyalty. After the ceremony, as people mingled with coffee and conversation, a young nursing student approached me nervously. "Miss Hartley, I'm starting my clinical rotations next month," I wanted to say. She paused, gathering courage. "I wanted to say thank you for showing us that nurses have power, that we don't have to stay silent when we see something wrong." "You never had to stay silent," I told her gently. "The system just made you think you did. That's what we changed." She nodded, then added quietly, "My mother is a doctor. She says what you did was unforgivable, that you betrayed your family." "Maybe I did," I acknowledged. "But I protected my patients, and I'd make the same choice again." The student smiled, straightened her shoulders, and walked away with new confidence in her step. That night, alone in my apartment, upgraded now to a proper 1-bedroom in a better neighborhood, thanks to my promotion and the financial stability I'd built entirely on my own, I opened my laptop to the file I'd kept throughout this entire ordeal. It was titled simply, "The Cost." Inside, I'd documented everything I'd lost. My family, the trust fund I'd been removed from, worth approximately $800,000, the relationships with extended relatives who'd sided with my parents, the social connections that had evaporated when I became persona non grata in their circles. Then I'd documented what I'd gained, my self-respect, the knowledge that I'd saved lives, the professional recognition from colleagues who respected my integrity, the unshakable certainty that I'd done the right thing regardless of personal cost. The mathematics were stark. I'd traded my family, financial security, and social standing for my conscience and my professional integrity. It wasn't even close to an equal exchange. I'd won. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. We'd reconnected 8 months ago. our relationship now built on mutual respect rather than the chaos of early infatuation. He was working a night shift but had taken a break to check in. How was the ceremony? Did you cry? Almost. Patricia held my hand. She's good people. So are you. Don't let anyone tell you different. Never planned to. The truth was, I hadn't cried at the ceremony because I was done crying over my family. I'd grieved them 2 years ago. Grieved the parents who'd loved me conditionally. Grieved the sister who'd chosen cruelty over kindness. Grieved the family I'd thought we were before I understood what we actually were. But I was done grieving. Now I was building. Last month, I'd been accepted into a graduate program for nursing administration with a full scholarship. In 5 years, I'd have my doctorate and be in a position to influence healthcare policy at a systemic level. To implement patient protection protocols not just at one hospital, but across entire healthcare systems. Victoria would be released from prison in 5 years. She'd be 41 years old, unable to practice medicine, with a felony record and an addiction she'd hopefully learn to manage. She'd have to rebuild her life from rubble, without the family safety net that had protected her throughout her privileged upbringing. My father had taken a position at a medical ethics think tank. Ironic, given everything, writing about the importance of institutional accountability. He'd published a paper last month acknowledging his role in enabling Victoria's behavior, though he'd carefully avoided mentioning me by name. Small progress, I supposed. My mother had moved to Florida, far from the social circles that had defined her identity. She'd lost her country club, her charity board positions, her entire carefully constructed world. Last I heard, she was working part-time at a resort, living in a modest condo, diminished in every way that had mattered to her. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but I felt no guilt either. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. The difference was I could look at myself in the mirror every morning and know that when it mattered, when the stakes were highest, I'd chosen patience over family, truth over loyalty, justice over peace. And I'd do it again. A year ago, I'd started teaching a course at the nursing school, Professional Ethics and Advocacy in Healthcare. The class was always full, with waiting lists every semester. Students wanted to learn how to speak up, how to document evidence, how to protect patients when the system failed them. I taught them everything I'd learned. The importance of meticulous documentation, the power of evidence over emotion, the strategic value of building airtight cases before going public. The reality that sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing everything else. I also taught them something my family had never understood, that loyalty to principles matters more than loyalty to people. That protecting the vulnerable is always more important than protecting the powerful. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable for their harm. My students called me Hardcore Hartley. I wore the nickname with pride. On the 2-year anniversary of the medical board hearing, Patricia Chen hosted a dinner at her home for everyone who'd been involved in the case. Her children and grandchildren were there, the grandchildren who still had their grandmother because a nurse had been paying attention when a doctor wasn't. Over dessert, Patricia's daughter Sarah pulled me aside. She was a lawyer, sharp and no nonsense. I've been following the Hartley Protocol implementations across the country, she said. 17 states have adopted similar patient protection policies. Medical schools are revising their ethics curricula. The AMA published new guidelines about addressing physician impairment. You changed healthcare, Elena. I reported a dangerous doctor. The system did the rest. No. She shook her head firmly. You risked everything to force the system to work the way it should have been working all along. That's not just reporting. That's courage. Later, as I drove home, I thought about that word. Courage. My family would use different words. Betrayal, vindictiveness, cruelty. They'd tell anyone who'd listen that I'd destroyed a brilliant doctor out of jealousy, that I'd torn apart a family over professional rivalry, that I'd valued punishment over redemption. Let them. Because the truth was simpler. I'd valued patience over politics, safety over reputation, justice over peace. And I'd sleep soundly every night for the rest of my life knowing I made the right choice. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. This is Victoria. I'm not supposed to contact you, but I needed to say this. I'm clean. 18 months sober. I'm in a program that helps formerly incarcerated people prepare for re-entry. I've accepted that I'll never practice medicine again, and I understand now that what you did wasn't about destroying me. It was about protecting people I was too selfish and sick to protect myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what it took for you to do what you did. And I'm sorry I made it necessary. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to offer some word of encouragement or acknowledgement. Part of me wanted to delete it and never think about Victoria again. In the end, I did neither. I saved the message in a folder titled Maybe Someday and put my phone away. Because forgiveness wasn't something I owed her, and reconciliation wasn't something I needed. She was building her own recovery, her own redemption. That was her work to do, not mine. My work was teaching the next generation of nurses to speak up, to document evidence, to protect patients even when protecting patients meant standing against powerful people who didn't want to be challenged. My work was living proof that the system could work when people had the courage to make it work. My work was showing every nursing student who walked past that plaque at Mass General that one person, armed with truth and unwilling to stay silent, could change everything. Victoria had called that graduation dinner my biggest mistake. She'd been wrong. My biggest mistake would have been staying silent, would have been choosing family loyalty over professional ethics, would have been protecting my sister's career at the expense of the patients she was endangering. Instead, I'd made the right choice. The hard choice. The choice that cost me everything I'd thought I wanted and gave me everything I actually needed. Self-respect, professional integrity, and the unshakable certainty that when the moment came, I'd chosen correctly. 3 years ago, my parents told me I was their biggest mistake. Tonight, looking at the life I'd built from the ashes of their rejection, I could finally say with absolute certainty, they were wrong. I wasn't their mistake. I was their reckoning, and I was exactly who I was supposed to be.